we would like to respectfully acknowledge that Trent University is on the land that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga, adjacent to the Haudenosaunee territory and in the territory covered by the Williams Treaty. I say miigwech to all people who have come before me to take care of these sacred lands and waters, and to those who know that it's everyone's responsibility now. We are all treaty people. Mel?
Great, thanks so much, Steph. I am delighted to see you all here, and I want to welcome you to Enwayaang. As many of you who are repeat visitors know, Enwayaang means the way we speak together, and we take that quite literally here in Gzowski College. And Enwayaang is also the name of the building that Gzowski College is in. So we do this every week, and we are delighted this week to welcome Jarret Leaman. I'm just gonna, hold on one second. I'm delighted to welcome Jarret Leaman here with us today. So Jarret is Anishinaabe from Magnitawan First Nation. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration with a specialization in Human Resource Management and a minor in Indigenous Studies from Trent University, and a master's degree in Industrial Relations through the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University. Jarret is a business partner overseeing philanthropy and business development for Troon Technologies, and he is the founder of the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Technology. He is also a successful entrepreneur running the talent agency Ayabi Management, where he works with Indigenous talent in the entertainment industry. Jarret has been recognized as a national Indigenous leader, recognized as one of Huffington Post's top 3 Indigenous millennials in Canada. He was awarded the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers for his work in the Indigenous and LGBTQ2S communities. Jarret was awarded the Trent University Young Alumni Award in 2019. And he was also one of the first graduates of Peter Gzowski College and held roles with Gzowski College Cabinet, as well as working as a residence don during his time at Trent. It's rare that we have a guest who is right from the beginning of our Gzowski College years as a relatively young college. So I want to welcome you, Jarret, and I think I will turn it over to you to give us a little bit more about your topic.
Sure, yeah. Thank you again for having me, and thanks for inviting me, and I'm always glad to come back to the old stomping grounds. I think I helped write the Constitution for the college cabinet, as it didn't exist. And when I started, it was just in its first year. So, I think the office, setting up the office in the space that it's in, I don't know if it's still there or not, underneath those stairs there, that used to just be a stairwell. And so we worked to put a wall there, and now hopefully it's still there. So, yeah, so thanks for having me again. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about what I've been doing after post-Trent, and some of the work and things that I've gotten into and that I've gotten up to. I was quite busy at my time at Trent. As you heard, I was part of the college cabinet. I was a senator for 2 years, and then I was president. And I also sat on the TCSA board, and I also actually did community theater in Peterborough. I think I did 4 or 6 musicals during my time at Trent. So I was quite busy and quite involved, and I haven't really slowed down much yet. I think this pandemic break has really been a nice sort of break for me. So today I'm going to just talk a little bit about where I started, how I came through my journey, and then really how I got to the tech space, actually, where I predominantly exist now, and hopefully it provides you an opportunity to see a pathway and an opportunity in a career, maybe that you're not studying a certain field. I didn't study technology or innovation, but here I am today. I always say this: when I was at an undergrad, I was in the business program, and I could never understand why people took English. And then, what are you going to do with that? And it's kind of come full circle. So now that I have my own teams and staff, I find myself pretty much only hiring English grads. So never underestimate the ability to write and comprehend. It's really, really important. So today I'm going to Oh, I don't know how to, there we go to the next one. There we go. So I'll talk a little bit about the businesses today to get an overview. Some of you, I think I did a presentation about 1.5 years ago at Trent, I'm not sure, but I'll talk a little bit about the businesses. It was not my intention to be an entrepreneur when I was at Trent. I knew I was in business, but I didn't take small business or entrepreneurship classes. I took human resources there. And yet I have founded three organizations that are really all moving pretty quickly, really within the last 5 years. So I'll talk a little bit about the IB management. It's a private sole proprietorship at the moment. And then Akawe Technologies is my main company. And it's a technology company that works, is a blockchain developing company. We work mostly in fintech. And then I also founded a nonprofit, the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Technology. So I'll just kind of go through that and talk a little bit about my journey along the way as well. Okay. So in IB management, we do, we're a full service production company. So we provide a lot of work to talent in appearance management, social media management, public relations. We do a bit of cultural awareness in a lot of those campaigns. My client lists, we do travel around the world in some of these work. And I only work with Indigenous talent in this business. Some of the social media brands and customers that we work with, you can see here in this company, some pretty big, large Canadian brands in the company, in the country. So I do a lot of work with Bell Media. I participate on air, I don't know, maybe once or twice a year, usually with CTV. And my clients do quite a bit as well. We've done a lot of work for the government within regards to elections, so promoting Indigenous people to vote, Manitoba Mucklucks and the bank, mostly around promotion. So this is an example in the company of some of the things that we have pulled out. So you can see my one client there is Lisa Charlie Boy. She has a TV show on APTN called Urban Native Girl. She's a writer and a blogger, and we did an RBC Chosen Journey entrepreneurship campaign. So I kind of got about 3 of my clients engaged in that campaign with RBC. And then I also did work an ongoing relationship with RW & Co., which its host company is Reitmans in clothing. And we continue to work strongly with RW & Co. And that campaign was done with my client there, Ashley and Tessa Virtue and Karine from Quebec. So I don't know if any of you watch her TV show, but I really like it. We do a lot of work with some products as well in the agency. So we just did a campaign with Nintendo, Folgers, Smile Direct Club, HelloFresh. Some of my clients work with Nike. And so I sort of manage the business side of what that relationship looks like. And in the agency, we have talent agents that work for my clients. They work out of LA and New York. We have makeup artists, stylists, lawyers that we work on, and contract negotiations. And so essentially I have a host of different contractors that work for whatever my clients may need. So for example, my clients, one of my clients does New York Fashion Week. And so the clothes that she's wearing, getting them shipped there, you know, hotels, everything, all of it from start to finish. And my clients, most of my clients request that I travel with them. And so I do. It just happened to be that they're my friends as well. So that always works out. This is again, just some more examples of some other campaign work that we've done. You can see HelloFresh, Nintendo, Hilberg and Burke we did, as well as Nike. So just giving you some examples. And then I also do some management consulting through this company as well. You can see I've done or my own appearances as well. We've done work at Trent, Harvard, Google, you know, the list goes on and on there for appearances. And then I also host speaking engagements. So some of my clients are on the Prime Minister's Councils for Social Media and Instagram, and you know, a host of other events that my clients undertake. We try to work with a lot of our First Nation governments, and so this is just a snapshot of some of the communities that we've been able to work with as a talent agency. And then here's sort of the management consulting work that I've done over the years. So that's a little bit of IB management. I'll talk a little bit about myself. You saw the policy, you saw the brief there. This is a campaign I did with TD during Pride Month a while ago. and Manitoba Mucklucks. I've done a lot of other modeling as well. I did mostly for couture in New York when I was young, like when I just graduated from Queens. And some of those work you can see here in some of the coverage that I undertake. Mostly I speak about entrepreneurship, two-spiritedness in Canada, and technology. Here you go. There's some of the accomplishments, I guess, and you can see here that I always feature the Trent University. I got the Gzowski College Community Award. I got the Garrett Sun Life Prize, and I got the Alumni Award. So, you know, I have been featured heavily through Trent, and I'm always very, very grateful for the support. There's some highlights of some of the speaking engagements that I do. This is only a portion of them. I do quite a bit every year. This is just me, and then my clients also do them as well. Yeah, so I'll get into it now. That was a little bit about the management company, and I'll get into the other companies in a minute. I'm from Magnetawan First Nation, which is outside of Parry Sound in Southern Ontario, I call it. I know in Toronto, a lot of people think, you know, Sudbury's north, but it's not. And identify as two-spirited and gay, and identify as he, him. I consider myself an entrepreneur, finally, after about, you know, after about 10 years. And I really am passionate about volunteer work. I do a lot of volunteer in the community, and I actually, in my tech company, actually mandate that my staff actually do a volunteer as well. So some of my staff are on youth agency boards here in Toronto. Other ones do work for, you know, raising youth, you know, whatever they're interested in. They just need to be engaged in the community and giving back, and they're always happy to do that. I would say that I'm mostly focused on technology right now, as that company tends to grow. And I've been fortunate enough to be recognized as a national community builder. I was selected to participate in the Governor General's Tour in 2017, and I was stationed in the Northwest Territories for a month, and all the way up to Tuk, right on the Arctic Ocean, all the way down through the flying communities and then into Yellowknife. So that was a really great opportunity and a program to do, and to be selected to participate in. And I also completed the Civic Action Diversity Fellowship program here in Toronto. So when I moved to Toronto, I really wanted to find a network. So I took my volunteer experience and my work in universities, and I applied to be in a fellowship. They call it like a civic MBA, and it's a year-long program that they provide programming, and you have a cohort of individuals. And it's really interesting. It makes Toronto very small, because you're really meeting sort of the top 20 up-and-coming leaders in the city, and we're from all across different industries. So I got to meet a lot of government people, as well as bankers, as well as city executives, and that was a really good opportunity. So just thinking about using volunteer and thinking about, you know, if you're coming to your end at Trent, in Toronto, there are lots of programs that young people can participate in, and fellowships. And sometimes they're very competitive. The Governor General's program was competitive. It had 3 interviews, sort of the whole essay speak, and a whole essay that you had to write out, and it only happens every 4 years. So it was, sometimes they're very long, sometimes they're shorter, but I would encourage you to engage in those type of activities. So just some images here, I guess, that I always try to talk about. So there's me getting my award from, I guess we can now say, a less contentious Governor General. We just had for you, we just had, I think, one of our first times we've ever had a Governor General resign, and now, you know, what do we do? You know, I was in the last year as for that Governor General, and he is the sponsor of that program, and he attends all the events. And at the end of the program, you do a presentation from the region. So you say, like, what did you find when you were there, based on a theme? And we presented it to the Governor General and Supreme Court justices. So that was a little bit nerve-wracking, but they had a lot of really great comments for us. And then you can see in the bottom there that's my dad and my grandfather and my aunt, and that's at our library on our reserves. So that's just a little bit about me and my family. I have had a really varied career. So I started out in going to school in Oshawa at high school, and I was really engaged in the arts. And I continued to be engaged in the arts even in Peterborough. I danced at a studio in Peterborough while I was an undergrad, because we didn't really have a dance team, I don't think, yet, or at Queen's we did. I was on the Queen's dance team, but not at Trent. And I really still invested in the arts. The IB management really is a full-time job. I have a senior level person that's really helping me run that company, and there's a lot of work coming in that, but it still really always has been sort of my side just business, because it really started out with my friends. And so you can see my other client is Lisa Charlie Boy. She has a CBC show called New Fire that I was on. I was on her TV show, Urban Native Girl TV. And so I've sort of continued to be engaged in the arts as I go through, and continue to support my friends in the way that I know best, which is really around business, contract management, and long-term growth. And so at the agency, I really am a business manager. And I really manage the business of those notables and their income, and we really work towards residual income models within the art space. So I still have been invested and keep invested in the arts. Not so much anymore, other than on the business side, but hopefully maybe one day when I have some free time, I will. I got to do a lot of cool things with some really Indigenous art, innovative Indigenous artists over the years. So I worked with a photographer, Nadia Kwandabens, and I was in the Concrete Indian series, which is like, I think that was up at Trent for a while. And that was sort of featured in books and other things around. Like really around that image was really around, I see myself as a business person, and that was taken pictures, kind of hard to see it sideways, but it was on Bay Street. And so you can kind of see me looking into the RBC building, and on the inside, on the back, you can just see my suit, but on the inside, you can see my chest plate, my traditional chest plate. Sometimes I go through this just because I don't know if people are aware or not. I think that this may not be as relevant here today, but I always just try to remind people that there are 3 distinct groups of Indigenous peoples in Canada: First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. And I kind of, someone said this to me, I think it was at Trent, and it stuck with me. And it was, I kind of think of 3 main differences between the groups, and it's cultural, legal, and geographical. So if you think about like First Nation, for example, obviously we have a unique culture versus Métis. It's different than Métis and Inuit. There's cultural differences. If you think about legal differences, we do have legal differences. So, the constitutional rights are there for the Métis people, but they're different than they are for First Nation individuals and communities. And the Inuit also have different legal rights. And one of the things that really stuck out to me on the Inuit side was the Inuit students that attend post-secondary, their funding agreements are to school are all with the Mississaugas of a credit. They're not because the Inuit territory is a territorial government, and it's sort of different. It was made later in the 1994. And I believe that they really only have, their funding is linked on how long they're within the North. So if they leave the North, then they, how do you finish a 4-year degree? If you're leaving the North, and then there's obviously geographical differences, with very distinct areas where the Inuit peoples, for example, live within Canada, and the Métis as well within Canada, because legally, whether you agree with the laws or not, the Métis population technically legally doesn't exist east of Ontario. If you look at the National Métis Council's Supreme Court ruling on that, so there is some legal differences there, and also geographical differences. And so I like to talk a little bit about being two-spirited, and so what does it mean to me? And I'm not going to read through this, but it's sort of, for me, I really started my two-spirited journey at Trent. I did not come out until I was in Toronto, so 2010, which I had already graduated from schooling at that point. And I was in an Indigenous economic development class because I did business and Native studies, and I had a really good elder ask me if I wanted to learn, a women's teaching or two-spirited teaching, and I was like, kind of like, what? Like, I didn't really realize that, the elder had obviously seen in me what I wasn't willing to share with others, and it started the whole journey, and it was really impactful for me. And then it was also very helpful for me at Trent, working in learning my language. So I did get accepted to other universities, but no other university in 2005 offered Anishinaabewin as a language. My father was part of the Scoops generation, and my mother is British, Canadian. So the language would have been lost in our family if I hadn't taken it. So I went to Trent specifically for the classes, not really understanding what I was, getting myself into, or what I didn't really have any expectations. I grew up in a small town in Port Elgin, Ontario, which is in the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario. And I grew up off reserve because my father works in the nuclear industry. So I was disconnected from my community and my home community. We still, like, my grandma and family members still live on the res, and we still go. But if that's, you go once or twice a year, it's different. You don't, and so for me, at Trent, it really started a journey that really blossomed into really what my focus has been in my companies and the work that I've done in my career so far. I'm 34. I always kind of joke, I don't look like it, but I was finished my undergrad when I was 21 or 2021. And then my master's program was 18 months straight. So when I was 22, I had a master's degree, and I'd already worked for the university. I worked at Trent as a recruiter while I was in my undergrad. I think it was like in the fall, it was like 2 days a week or 1 day a week. And then I also did consulting in my undergrad for the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and the development of their Indigenous Relations strategy that's now headed up by Bob Watts from the AFM. And funny story, Bob Watts was also the fellow in the School of Policy Studies at Queen's when I was studying there. So it's a small world. But my work experience really started when I was at Trent in my, the end of my first year. I was an RA, I was a Don as well. And so I worked there, and then I also did tours. I worked for admissions as well, and then did traveling on the APSIP, the Aboriginal Post-Secondary Information Program tour for Trent University in my third and fourth years of university. So, and then I went to Queen's and ended up doing recruitment for that university while I was studying my master's. Again, just went back on the tour again, which I've already been doing for 2 years. And so my work experience is a lot longer, seems a little bit broad or long for how my age, but it's because I actually worked pretty much full time during all of my study. I was band funded by my community, so my tuition and my residence and living expenses were paid for. But I still worked. More than full time, and went on a. Used that money to go study in the castle. I studied in the UK as for my master's program at Queen's. So yeah, so the two-spirited to me is around having those teachings. It's a link between spirituality, sexuality, and gender, which is really different for some, hard for some Western concepts to understand. And so I've actually spoken at the United Church. I grew up Christian, I went to a very conservative church growing up with my parents, and they're still in that church. I am not. It is not affirming. So so for me, religion has always been, and spirituality has always been a really big piece of my life, and it still is today. So I'm just going to go through that. And talk a little bit about my family, my religious upbringing. So that did play an impact, obviously, on colonization and what we seen as. My mom was in the religion before she married my father, but it was never, being Indigenous was never a bad thing, and it was always very highly respected in our family and by our peers. It wasn't seen as bad or anything, but it's just the values sometimes clashed with what we understand the Indigenous values to be. I'll talk a little bit about my university experience. I went on to, after Trent, I went on to Queen's. I was on the gymnastics team at Queen's, and that was a lot of work. And I was kind of a bit out of shape because I had been doing gymnastics a little bit, before, but not at Trent. And then I went back, and then I went into it sort of at Queen's. I got to study abroad, which was really interesting. I didn't do that at Trent in business. My courses were too full. So I'm very independent, and I always kind of have been, and I feel that my independence journey started at Trent. The move-in day that I'm sure we're all familiar with, that we know this cohort of Trent, first years will have maybe missed, but we all know that day is so significant. That was when it really started for me, and I lived on the 6th floor south of Gzowski, and I was at the very last room on the left. And I always used to say, there was only one other person that slept on my bed before I got there, because I was there in year 2. And that's where my, the independence started. And I started I had goals set for myself in high school, and they were very large goals. It was things like I had put on my list, like I wanted to live in a castle, and like that I did it when I was leaving the farm. Actually, the farm in Port Elgin and Owen Sound region that I grew up on. At that time, I had never traveled. My family, we were middle class, upper middle class maybe, and we didn't really travel a lot. So I didn't really have that experience growing up, and I just wrote a list and saying this is what I was going to do, and I actually done a lot of those lists, and I actually took a picture of it, and it's funny how when I put it out there at that young age that the opportunity arose and I took it, and I think that's really important, especially when you're looking to figure out where you want to go. I continue to do advocacy, obviously, on Indigenous file, and as well as in the LGBT 2S communities. So you can see here, we talked about IB management. We talked about Akaway Technologies a little bit, and then there's also the nonprofit, which is the Center for Indigenous Innovation. So I'm going to go into those just a little bit so you can see how it works and what we're doing. This is just an overview I'm going to go through just so you can see. So at Akaway Technologies, we are conscious entrepreneurs, and we work on, looking at really the catchphrase thoughtful integration of technology, or how do you implement, or how do you produce technology that results in positive social change. I'm not a technologist, but my co-founder is Paul Dubé, and he's Métis, and he is. He owns and runs True Technologies, which is where I worked. They sort of incubated Akaway and me, and then we branched off and we developed Akaway Technologies. True Technologies really focuses on fintech too, but mostly in the Bahamas, and then we also work a lot in Pakistan and in that market. So, and then in Akaway Technologies, we focus on you know, really on the social side. We are positioned as an Indigenous tech company, but we are not all of our clients are Indigenous, but we strive to work with our Indigenous communities. I'm also not the president or the leader of my organizations. So my president is Akawi Technologies, is an amazing woman named Leanne Bellegarde, and she's from Saskatoon, from the Papitskis First Nation, and she was really one of the, I think, one of the early on, first, you know, one of the first in that province, women in law. And she did a lot of land claim negotiations, or city solicitor with the city of Saskatoon. You know, she's a national, she's also got honor. She got the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Medal Jubilee. She's also a lawyer, and she's Queen's Counsel as well. She's got the QC designation. She's very, very well accomplished. And she was the executive that oversaw diversity for Nutrient and Potash Corp, which is one of the largest companies, I think, employers in the Saskatchewan region. So Leanne and I have been sort of in touch for a while. She was also worked at the Edward School of Business at the University of Saskatoon. And so she has really been driving a lot of the work in Akawi Technologies. I'm the strategy officer, because I kind of have to bounce between different companies. But yeah, that's just a little bit about Akawi. We develop and maintain values-driven data platforms that really relate and related software that can be used to enable and assist communities with social, cultural, environmental, health, and economic and development problem solving. So we really look at how, like, you know, how can Indigenous communities have access to their own data, and how can they use that to make better decisions, and how can they have a digital infrastructure within a First Nation government if they don't have one? What is the process and roadmap to that does that look like? And we're currently doing that, actually, with some of our clients, and it's interesting. It's based off of, you know, the model around, you know, bridging or leapfrogging the digital divide, you know, within that exists between, you know, Indigenous communities and Canadians in this country. So we can see here, enabling and empowering community prosperity is something that we really want to focus on, and that we do focus on. There's a lot of empowerment work that has to be done in regards to, you know, new technology, change management, as well as keeping that prosperity model in. And one of the things, you know, I was very focused at Trent was, you know, education is what we need to help, you know, our communities and you know, my community and communities surrounding. And I agree with that. That is really important. But as I've gotten older, you know, economic sovereignty is also something that has become very relevant, and become more important to me. Like, I didn't really understand it fully until recently, but you know, we can't, you know, it's hard to educate our way out of poverty, and I think that we have to really think about sort of the economic models and economic development principles and strategies that are needed to help with our communities. And I think that technology can assist in that greatly. We have our values here. You can see that our values are based off of the Anishinaabe People's Guide, but I've also put them in Cree because Leanne is Cree, Assiniboine, and I'm Anishinaabe. I guess, you know, there's just a little bit on the opportunity as we start to talk more about tech. The digital economy, the sense of scale, like thinking about how many people are actually working in tech and how big it is. The digital economy activities grew by 40% over the overall economy, and on an annual basis, the digital economy is increasing the total economy every year. So, you know, digital economy is something that, you know, was kind of this, when I was at Trent 2005 and 6, it really was like, oh, you know, the fourth revolution. It wasn't even really considered the digital revolution yet. And I've kind of always seen it as that kind of, oh, we're talking about the future. And, you know, it's been 10 years, maybe more than that. Yeah, it's graduated 2009. Yeah, it's been 12 years. You know, it's here. It's already here, and that has been since my time at Trent, which I find fascinating. We work a lot with breathing life into Indigenous sovereignty. So when we're talking about blockchain and we're talking about building a data system for a First Nation government, there's a lot of different pieces involved in it. And this is just a kind of a map, action pieces in here. And you can see there's nation building that we do, equitable and virtual access to internet. So I wrote a paper in the municipal world on bridging the digital divide. And what I did that with through as a city, I was a Future Cities Fellow for the federal government's Future and Smart Cities Initiative. And I wrote with a woman named Tanya Linklater, Dr. Tanya Linklater, and she was Tam Fook, actually, and she is actually now my director of research at CIIT. I pulled her, she came over and worked for us, and I sort of did some thought leadership over that year around what does the space look like, and when we talk about an Indigenous community, and what is the digital economy and what is the roadmap, and I sort of identified 4 pillars. And so the first one is connection to broadband. You need internet, whatever that looks like, whether it's satellite, broadband. That is a pillar that needs to be addressed. The second one that we have seen very little work in, we've seen a lot of research in, but not how do you implement that work. And it's the work that we're doing now is the second pillar, which is data governance. How do you manage and have a data governance framework that manages the information that that you hold and that you control and that you access and that you give other people permission to access, and we know that, that saying, information data is the new gold. It's true, data has value. And what we see happening in, from a federal government perspective, for example, is, Indigenous economic health data being sold to pharmaceutical companies to help make better drugs for, the Indigenous population. But the government's making money off that, not the individuals at the community level or the community government itself. And that's because the government doesn't have control or access to its own data of its own citizens or its members. And that's a big problem. And then the third pillar is around digital infrastructure. So, okay, you have a nice policy, data governance and data management system set up. You have now what do you do? And this is where we talk about the blockchain and digital infrastructure that has really been coming out in the last 5 years. And really it's a decentralized decision-making ledger, that's blockchain. And it has a governance level that requires consensus decisions. So if the access or doesn't meet the consensus of the decentralized servers, then the transaction will not happen. And that's really what makes blockchain immutable at this point. What is interesting is that concept around consensus is really how, obviously, we as Indigenous communities managed our affairs pre-colonization. And I think what I find interesting, and I talk to youth about technology, is like we've taken really strong core principles that our communities relied upon and existed around, and we've turned them into technology. And this concept, we've seen it at Trent, for example, with the Indigenous environmental studies, right? It was environmental studies, but what does Indigenous environmental knowledge know and how does it contribute to the space? And I think that as Indigenous people in the technology space, our principles around governance have never ever been more critical and more valuable than they are now in regards to how you're building software and blockchain technology that is helping communities. So that's a little bit about that sort of digital road. And we have the ability to create, we have ability to develop virtual asset payment like rails. So as a company, so the ability to do that. So what that means is now not only are we working on the governance of a community, but then now we're really getting at my main goal, which is that economic freedom, which is really where I'm heading. Again, the possibilities are endless with the self-sovereign identity. You can have a marketplace, you can have a COVID response app, because the information is centralized and it's based off of a sovereign identity of its citizens. And it's up to the community to understand and control how it manages its data of its citizens, and it can be done securely through a blockchain developed ecosystem. And then it can eventually bring in other resources around, tokenization, cryptocurrency, social media, communications, and a whole host of other things. So think of the Akawe operating system and AOS as like, you know how when I don't know if you know Salesforce, where they have like, you have a bunch of different apps that you can go in. So you sign into Salesforce and then you go in and there's all these tools that you can use. Think about that, but like for a First Nation government, and citizens can access their own information as well. So as a citizen, you'd be able to know, like right now, I don't know what information my band has on me. I don't know if I don't know anything. I don't even know if they know. And this would sort of eliminate that, because it would be clear on the blockchain ledger what they know about you, what information they're holding, and then really how they're using it as well. And so that's really where Kawe is focused. There's voting implications for it as well. And you know, these are tools. So when you look at an infrastructure is the third pillar, the fourth pillar is the tools. Then you have these tools that you use based off of the data that's collected in the infrastructure that's governed by the governance and data management principles. That's then, you know, all happens because you have internet access. And so and what we're seeing is Indigenous communities building apps with things, and they're just kind of hanging out there. And it's like, well, where's that information going? Who has control of that data? What if it gets hacked? Where's it going, right? Like, these are really big concerns that if you jump those other steps and you start building an app right away on something, you know, that's a big problem in my opinion, especially for a government, a self-sovereign government. You know, that groundwork has to be done at the infrastructure level and at the government, digital government readiness level. We do, so just talk a little bit about COVID Indigenous Emergency Preparedness app that we were working on. This is more around a response app itself. So it's actually more expansive than COVID. It's in regards to how do you do emergency preparedness? You know, is there a food shortage? Is there an oil spill? Is there a forest fire? How do you communicate that to your citizens in your community where they can all get it? And it's available on desktop and on mobile app. And because of the work we're doing in the first pillar around connecting and engaging, obviously having internet connection is important. And there's different ways that you can do that. A lot of communities have like internet access in their schools that are there, but that's it. And there's ways that you can build that internet connection to amplify it and use it as well. And we're working on with some of our clients on some of the strategies on how to do that so that you could have access to your community and to your citizens. This is just an example of sort of what the internal piece of it looks like. And that was that. So that was the tech piece. I'm not going to go too much more into that. It gets kind of, I don't know if sometimes it's hard to follow. I remember when I first started in the space and people would talk like I'm talking right now, and I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I think we've, you know, inched it along, you know, ever so slowly as the years go on. So hopefully that was helpful. But I think you can see the requirement and the need from Indigenous communities that is going to be in the tech industry once you start to have a digital economy enabled within a First Nation government. Because right now, a lot of our governments don't even have a website. So they don't have any digital infrastructure. So when you do have it, what's going to happen and where's that workforce going to come from? And that's really why I created CIIT, which I'll get into later on. So the talent, I know it's kind of out of order. This is just some of the talent that I work with. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're all really cool Indigenous people that are friends and that I love. You know, JarretLeaman.com has more information on it, but I don't really have a website for IID management because it's not a business that I promote per se, because I am really at full capacity with the clients that I already have. And it does require significant investment for a client to come on board with me, because it requires branding exercises. You need a website, you need a business plan, there's a whole host of things that are needed. And I think that a lot of people aren't really realizing the full potential of, you know, the monetization and marketing initiatives that have moved really onto Instagram and other social media platforms. There's residual models that you can build into that. But it requires a lot of setup work, but I have that process set up for my clients, and it's working. That's not something that you can go to school for. I have no idea how I became a sort of entertainment manager, but I learned a lot on the road. and I just kind of track everything that I learn and turn it into a policy or framework. And then I have a network of that information that helps with individuals that I bring on to help with me with my client management. So when we were talking about tech and we were talking about, you know, getting a digital economy on a reserve, or creating an Indigenous, you know, inclusion in the fourth, you know, the digital revolution, the question then always becomes, great, so you have a process and a system that you can use to help us, you know, manage our data and help us do a lot of other things through technology, but we don't have a workforce. Like, where are we going to hire these people? Like, once you implement this, like, you know, this, you know, it's gibberish to me. And so what I started with actually was the Center for Indigenous Innovation, and that is a national nonprofit that has been up for about maybe 4 years now. And we are sponsored by, our corporate sponsor is PayPal Canada, but our main sponsor is Akawi Technologies and myself. I've actually funded a lot of the work in CIIT personally. And we have an executive director, a director of research, and a coordinator. So this is sort of, you know, it's expanding. I'm going to go into this a little bit. And this may be of interest to some of those that are on the, maybe you're in second year right now, or maybe you're in third year. Fourth year, maybe a little bit too soon. But really what we're doing is increasing Indigenous representation in the tech and innovation sectors. And it was really in regards to what I saw when I was traveling on the Governor General's tour and all the work that I've been traveling across community. I just didn't see any, you know, sort of lack of technology, or even really people with a tech focus. Like, even myself, like when I first started, I was like, oh, like tech is, you know, like your IT person. It's like, no, it's like, there's a lot more than that. That person is very important, but you know, and so our mission is to provide programming that provides excellence in technology training, increases Indigenous representation in the technology industry in Canada, and promotes problem solving using technology with an Indigenous lens. And that really gets to that point that I talked about earlier with the blockchain, was around, like, you know, fundamental concepts of consensus building, community building, how you agree information is shared, really was, you know, can be drawn the parallels to Indigenous ways of knowing Indigenous governance. And I don't know if there's, like, you know, blockchain molecules in the water at Trent or not, because I never thought that I would be in blockchain. But, you know, really, that was really founded, a lot of that huge foundational work was done by Don Tapscott, who I think is your current chancellor, and he went to Trent as well. So there's something there in the ecosystem at Trent that it gets us. And I really think I point to the interdisciplinary approach of education at the institution, because these types of problems around blockchain and introducing in technology, you can't just study 4 years of software engineering and say you're going to do that, because you have to have a strong understanding of policy, government, social and cultural issues, and you're not going to get that from some of those streamlined professional programs that we would traditionally think would be in tech. And so how do we encourage that, you know, using problem solving with technology with an Indigenous lens? And you can see in the work that we're doing in data governance models for First Nation governments, there's, you know, the traditional models that are used in Canada, but then there's other models like the OCAP principles that are used in research. There is a set of principles called the EAOKA, I think, in the north. And there is also one that was used in Europe and globally as well, another set of frameworks as well. And how do you take those values and incorporate them into your governance model so that it feeds into your technology? Because really, when we're building a digital government, you know, a lot of things are done through AI and automation. And we know and we hear in the tech space around the bias of AI. And that bias comes from having values that are not embedded into the governance frameworks of how you're managing that technology. And so CIIT, you can see, foster a network of collaboration between public, private, academic, and nonprofit institutions to solve problems. And, you know, our vision and values are there. This is sort of the ecosystem that I came up with. And for CIIT. And again, took me about a year to pull this concept together, and I incubated it with a bunch of different individuals. I met with a bunch of different foundation people and just had, you know, chats and dinners and said, like, if we're going to do this, what does this look like? And you can see here the impact sectors of CIIT are, you know, health, technology, law, social programming, you know, and our partnerships are multi. So we do partner with government now. We have we employ Indigenous youth through an employment agency in Toronto here, and that's our only government funding that we use. But then we also have academics. So we actually partner with OCAD University. I'm on the board of directors for OCAD, and I'm on the executive for that institution. And we also partner with Indigenous learning institutions in Ontario. So people aren't familiar with those. I was actually the senior administrative officer, executive director of the Aboriginal Institutes Consortium before. That was my last sort of lobbying gig, you know, 18-month gig before I went into my own businesses. And we developed the Indigenous Institutes Act with a collaboration between Ontario government and the 9 institutions. And now those are 9 accredited institutions that are on reserve for Indigenous people by Indigenous people. And, you know, they have like a 99% graduation rate. Some of them offer university programs, college programs. They have their own programming. And so we partner with them as well. Foundations and charities we work with, nonprofit and private. And then there's the programming. And when we think about CIIT, there's 3 areas. We have a tech skills accelerator, which we're actually doing currently. And we have a collaborative innovative network and the research and advocacy. So tech skills accelerator, you know, that was why it was originally started with our First Nation government clients saying, okay, where are we going to train people? So, well, I guess I'll do a nonprofit and we'll work on figuring this out. And we now, as CIIT, are partners. We are a nonprofit organization that provides service to the CELAR network, which is the Coalition of Leaders Against Racism, which is actually which is incubated and started and based out of Mars Discovery District here in Toronto. And it's a coalition of about 50 companies like TD, JP Morgan, Dell, the largest, you know, Deloitte, big management finance companies who are all looking for diverse talent in tech. And there's another nonprofit that works at the table as well, and it's called The House. So that was the Black initiative in technology that was you know, The Weeknd donated a lot of money to. And so The House is now on this network as well. And so basically we work with, you know, those organizations around starting to provide a pipeline of Indigenous talent into tech companies or banks, you know, whoever, tech industries. And we are starting that program. We're hoping to launch it in October or September of this year. We were successful in receiving 1.4 million from the federal government last year to do the program. But we, obviously because of COVID and our partners, there was just too much going on. We actually didn't accept the money. And we've come back and we've actually raised that through private now. So we are starting that journey now, this on the Tech Skills Accelerator piece. And, you know, it really is going to be a program. Think of it like, you know, your career center, but only for tech and only for Indigenous people on steroids. And so, you know, we're targeting recent grads. So if you want to come in and say, hey, like I maybe want to work in tech, I don't know, you know, I have a sociology degree, you know, I don't know what the space looks like. We're going to have a program that is going to incubate understanding the spaces. So software development, which would be coding and all of that, blockchain, project management, software development, obviously quality assurance and testing, and sort of the big categories of ICT technology and information communication technology. And we also have a section that is around leadership and culture. And so for us, this is what makes our program unique in regards to software development companies. There's a lot of them recently, and they will say that they target, you know, diverse communities, but their programming doesn't reflect that. And our programming, you know, we're hoping to have, where we will have our programming, like our cultural on the land learning component, will be delivered by an Indigenous Learning Institute, and that are accredited, and that this is what they do, and that's a unique addition to our program, because we're really trying to create the leaders in the tech and innovation space. And I firmly believe that you need to bring your full self to work, and you need to bring your full self to the table. And I think that involves really understanding, Indigenous peoples and culture, even if it's not your own. It will maybe trigger you to understand your own. If you're Cree, for example, and we're offering it through an Anishinaabe perspective, they'll still be still a start. We have a collaborative innovative network. This started out of going to a lot of innovation conferences and Indigenous innovation conferences, and looking around and being the only Indigenous one there. As this is why am I attending an Indigenous innovation conference and I'm the only Indigenous person here? Like, let's start to get a handle on that, and that's sort of convening and collaborating, and we do that in our multi-stake partners, stakeholders in our programming. We don't replicate or duplicate. We piece together and use to create a new. And we're very collaborative, and we will work with many different organizations and individuals. And then the research and advocacy piece, because there's a lot of reports coming out, like for Brookfield, for example, Institute, and a lot of that sort of Ryerson, and we hear about the tech diversity in tech was a really big thing about 2 years ago. And when you look at those reports and you see Indigenous people in those reports, one of the reports states, won't name it, but it's like there's 5 Inuit women in tech in Canada. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's more than that. I'm pretty sure the tech companies haven't really understood how to even identify their Indigenous employees. And I wrote a whole book on that for my master's work that then got turned into public policy. I worked at the Council of Ontario Universities, and I worked on self-identification models. So the model that you probably use at Trent would have come down through the COU, which was really my main project for 3 years when I was working at COU. So again, you can see how that policy really fits well into all of these different areas in tech. So we now have a director of research, and we're going to be continuing to expand on the research work that we're doing, mostly in collaboration. And we'll probably continue to do writing the series that we do as well. So that's CIIT. Oh, there's a nicer picture.
Jarret, I just want to say I'm dying to ask you some questions, and I feel like I'm going to forget them. So I know you're going to leave us a little bit of time for that, but I just wanted to let you know that there's probably some people in the chat that are like, ooh, that's making me think of 1,000 things, just to prompt that.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's it. So that
awesome.
was kind of all I was going to go through. Yeah. We're time for questions, and we're just looking at our partners. And the reason I think I said that was, I think that, recent grads from Trent, I think, would be a great addition to CIT program once we get it off, right? We'd be more than happy. So that's all I have today. Got through it all. Hopefully I was on time. Hopefully I didn't go over everything.
That's excellent. Do you want to stop your, if you want to take your share screen off so we can see a few more people? And I know we have a question in the group from Armand. So Armand, if you want to go right ahead, you can.
Armand, your microphone is off, actually.
Okay, how's that?
Great.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks, Jarret, for your fantastic presentation. I've heard you speak a few times. I believe the last time was at the 2019 Youth Alumni Award in Durham. We were at the now recently renovated and added Durham campus, and a great presentation there as well. Jarret, I wanted to speak a little bit about, or probe a little bit about your journey, and especially as it relates to your learning of or reconnecting with the Anishinaabe Moan language, and how important has that been to your journey, and as importantly, what needs to be done to preserve the more than 70 different Indigenous languages that are spoken in Canada today, according to the last census, and who should be doing that work?
Well, I think, so the first question I think was around like, what was it, what was it important to me? And I think one of the things is at the time I didn't realize it. I studied business. I was traipsing through, I'm not an outdoorsy kind of guy. We have like a hunting camp on my res. That's not, you're not going to find me there. You know, but doing it, and then when I looked back, I was like, wow, like that was really what I needed. And it was that, with that self, working on that self, which is really, really important, which when I'm, you know, 19 years old, that wasn't something that I had really, I was too, you know, too immature at that time. At that age, I was, personally, it was, to really understand that. And that's what, you know, understanding that is a critical piece to diversity and inclusion, bringing your whole self to work. You know, the tech sector is, I've worked in many different industries, you know, kind of as a stakeholder, as a lobbyist, essentially is what I was, for 10 years. You know, from nuclear industry to oil and gas when I was working at the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, you know, different sectors, tech now. And the tech sector itself is like where forestry was in the 90s, right? It is so far behind. And so building it into our program that we're offering this year at CIT is a reflection of how important I think it is. And understanding that even if it's not, you know, it will be on the land learning. Because even if you're, you know, I'm a tech person and I work on a computer all day, and it doesn't matter, like you're going to get out there and you're going to do it. Because that was what happened with me when I was going to seminars, and I was like, oh, here we go. It's cold out. It's winter. I don't want to go outside. But I did it. And it, you know, it was always so valuable. And I think that is what we're building it back in. And in regards to language, we know that languages are dying out. We know that our elders are dying out. I am a little concerned about sort of how the information is being collected and used when you look at building apps. As I talked about earlier, you know, if you're building an app for a community and a language and there's no governance in the community, who owns that language? Where's it going to go? How's it going to be used? There's nothing in there. There's been no foresight or more thought put into that, or very little. And that leaves the language open to being changed, or being morphed, or you know, sort of amalgamating together with other dialects. So I think it's up to the communities to do that work. There is a commission, I think, on the federal government. They have an industry that's doing some work on that. I think it has to be a collaborative approach. And I think we'll really start to see preservation of language on a scale that will help to reflect that once we have bridged our communities into the digital divide, because there's so many tools that can be used to capture that knowledge. But the communities where the knowledge is sitting just don't have access to the technology, or even really don't have access to internet at this time.
Thank you, Jarret.
Thanks. Does anyone else have a question? I have a couple, but I'll keep myself quiet if there's other people that want to pop their hand up or add something to the chat. Jarret, I'm just gonna, one of the students wrote into our chat that it's important to take pride and spirit in ourselves and invest in it. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, that there's the piece around, you know, pride in yourself, but then investing in it. And I think your talk really showed this interesting mix of how you view your identity and your whole self, as you put it, sort of putting into your energy, but putting it, I think of investing in two ways there, because you really have shown through your quite varied career that you have invested in a very literal way in a market. And I wonder if you would speak a bit to that, because I think it seems very authentic. I think that's kind of what that comment's getting at.
Oh, yeah, well, you know, you know, Trent, when I graduated from my undergrad, we had in the gathering space, we had, you know, Indigenous Studies has a ceremony for Indigenous grads. In 2009 was when I graduated. And you know, it wasn't as large as I think as it is now. And you know, where this started, and I had always envisioned myself working for a large organization, like a university or a bank. My dad worked, you know, in a nuclear plant, like, you know, 9 to 5, like, you know, that was what I grew up with. My mom did as well. And so that was what I thought I was going to be doing. And I had Elder Shirley Williams taught me my language, and she was speaking when we were graduating. And, you know, she said to me, she said, Jarret, you, you know, there was 4 of you in the business program when you started, and you're the only one here today. on this graduation day. And she said, you know, your community has invested a lot of resources into you and into your education. And she said, she said, you know, when somebody invests in you, you know, it's your responsibility to give back. And then as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, there goes my corporate career, right? I've never worked in corporate. And I focused it on, on that. And it really has, you know, sort of changed the way that I think about how I work. And I, you know, I'm a workaholic. I mean, I work all the time. I'm a single male. I don't have any children. And I, you know, this pandemic, working from home, we have an office in Toronto, but, you know, I've kind of worked on and off from home mostly for the last 5 years anyways. You know, this pandemic has been for me just like, not really anything changed, right? I'm not flying anymore. I think I was taking 5 to 8 flights a month prior to the pandemic with my clients and with traveling. We have an office in Saskatoon. We have, I was in Pakistan with our Troon partners, like our other company, we have a dev shop there. So I was over in Islamabad. I was everywhere. And you know, this has really been a good time for me. And I think that what Shirley said to me was really what stuck. And you can see that I've spent a lot of time thinking about where is the biggest gap that we have that will help with Indigenous in our community. So for me, it is around economic development, because I've seen, and I worked in education at the post-secondary level, really at COU, directly in government, helping create laws and policies and regulations. And there's a lot of people there, a lot of Indigenous people are there, it's well represented. And I feel comfortable that those people are doing really great things and they will continue to do great things. But there's nobody in tech and somebody has to start it. so here I am.
That's great. I was actually wondering if you sleep. Like when you were talking, I thought, geez, I don't actually think you sleep because I can't get over how many things you're involved in. I know someone else is probably going to ask a question, but I just wanted to say this before we go to another one, that when you were talking about the digital divide and digital infrastructure and sovereignty, it was like a little light bulb of like, okay, so there's physical land and that got taken from Indigenous communities, and you're jumping in early to say, hang on, there's other kinds of sovereignty and ownership, and we need to own that too. Like, this is not about like letting other people control access. That's what really struck me as you were talking about access to your data, because your data is part of the community. I really loved the way you put that. I hadn't really understood what you meant about digital infrastructure and sovereignty until you were talking that through, and then I just thought, wow, like there are important equity issues around land, but there's this additional important equity issue, and you're right at the forefront of that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, I almost kind of think of myself and our Kawi teams and CIT as like, we're sort of trying to start to think about laying the pegs down for like, almost like, you know, our land that's in the digital space, right? And we're setting that up. And I think that, you know, those governance and those are self-determined. Those really are essentially a treaty that will stop others from coming in and having control over your information. And right now, our communities are just, you know, we always say we're treaty people and we're focused on that, and we were. But if we don't act now, we're going to have a different set of digital treaties that we didn't participate in and didn't involve ourselves in, and that it's already happening, really, and no one's really doing anything about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm going to go to Kat first, and then Armand.
Hello. Sorry, I want to make a quick comment just at the beginning. I thought it was really funny where you're like, nobody studies English degrees. And then you went into it because I am an English major. And I was like, no. And then I was like, okay, it's okay. We're good. But so on that topic, saying that like everything is connected, regardless of what degree you're in, and it all can tie down, and going into tech, like you can have different pathways. And so you said a few seconds ago, you said your community has invested in you. And I'm just wondering, as a Trent student who has such a big like community behind you as Trent, and also like whatever master's education you go for, or whatever field you go into, with this digital community. I'm just wondering, like, what you would suggest and what you would point out as like key points of recognizing your potential and the opportunities that your community has as a growing and adapting individual.
Yeah, and this is like, my friend grew up on a remote kind of northern Alberta reserve, and they hadn't really, it's Cree, and they didn't really have a lot of contact. So it was pretty like, they were Christianized, but like it was all in Cree, and it was very like one of those communities that wasn't, it was still had its issues, but it had a lot of its culture, and it's interesting because he talks about his two-spirited journey, and I heard him. We were speaking at the Department of Justice, I think, or something. We were doing a panel there last year, and he said something to me which he never said before. He's an Indigenous person. He said, like, I grew up, very two-spirited and very obvious, and it was never a thing. Like, it was never like, it was like, you play with Barbies, and that's, you and they encourage it. It was like your gifts, like you have, you're two-spirited, you're going to have gifts, and we want to like make sure that those come to fruition. And so when the question that you asked sort of brought up that analogy, and how do you foster those gifts? And I think it requires a high level of self understanding and emotional intelligence. And so what is interesting was, when I was at Trent in the business program in the first year, you had to take emotional intelligence, IQ testing, you do all these testing, these different tests, and then they give it to you again in 4 years, and then you can see the growth, right? And when I started out in first year, my emotional intelligence was like in the bot, like it was bad. It was really bad. I grew up in a Christian, very closed Christian home. Like I grew up with like no TV, no radio, like, and I just didn't have it. And then, really, I think what really helped me was when I became an RA for 2 years, I had to think about other people because I was constantly getting up or, helping people. And at the end, my testing was significantly higher, and it's continued to do that. I think you really have to understand around yourself what it is that you want to do. And that list that I talked about when I was younger, it involved like, I listed what I wanted to do. I wanted to drive a Jaguar through the desert. I just did that. There's a picture of that. I wanted to study a castle. I did that. I wanted to go to 10 world cities. I've done that. Like literally, I have to make a new one because I've mostly done everything. And so that was really around what I wanted to do. And I think when you talk about your gifts, what is it that you're good at? Like for me, what is really interesting is that as a two-spirited person, traditionally in our communities, they were seen as the negotiators, the mended conflict between genders, this kind of role. And what's interesting about my master's degree is it's in the industrial relations, is mediation, negotiation, and collective bargaining, and that kind of thing. What's interesting is that what you see as what I have been doing is really fulfilling those roles. I just didn't even really realize it. And so I think you've really got to understand. I really understood that after. But I think it's a lot about just trusting what it is that you want to do, and always have a social impact piece to that. Because I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't, without the volunteer work that I've done. And I know that people say that all the time, but it really is what has helped. So like, my networks, sort of on the talent side and IB management, the reason why that business is so successful is because people are like, I need this. And then they're like, I need a Cree drummer from da-da-da-da, and I've traveled all over the country. I'm like, oh, I know someone, like, and I connect, like that's really what that business started out as. And so that was my skill, right? My skill is that, and then honing presentations and public speaking was really, really important to me. Remember, I went, was in a school that had a performing arts program, and I was in theater all the time and acting, and very comfortable with speaking and articulating on the spot. So I know my strengths, I know what those are, and I use them, and I use them throughout all of my businesses. I can tell right away when I see someone if I'm going to hire them and work with them. And sometimes people are like, what, really? And I always have an individual that I work with that, is a youth that's at risk sometimes. And those youth have come through Not all of them are at risk, but I mentor them and they work with me and they work in my companies. And, you know, like now the executive director of CIIT was one of those individuals who who graduated from Trent, Road Thomas, who worked at Tuna. He was there, you know, he's now the executive director of the nonprofit that's now working at CLAR. He's actually working at CLAR and Mars Discovery District on secondment from CIIT until he comes back. So like, you know, though, and I met Road 6 years ago, and, you know, I drove him up to Trent and said, you're going to go there, right? Like, you just know, and you've got to understand that and trust yourself and, you know, that, and listen to what other people say. I always kind of ask them, like, what do you think about this? Because people were saying to me, you're an entrepreneur. And I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur. No, I am an entrepreneur.
That's excellent. Yeah, Rhode's fantastic. I'm sorry he's not with us today. Great student that just graduated. So that's so nice to hear that come full circle. Okay, Armand, last question to you. Go for it.
Thank you, Melanie. And Jarret, I just want to reiterate your comments about volunteerism and how important it is to volunteer, and it not just help the community, but it helps yourself, and the networks that you establish and the contacts you establish there are invaluable going forward. My question is to do with technology, and you mentioned you didn't study technology, and I'm curious as to whether or not you have any regrets for not having studied technology, given your prevalence within the technological field these days, and maybe not studying it, did that give you insights and freedom of thought that you might not have had you studied more formally in that particular area?
I think in the area in the field of technology that I'm working in, it really is around D&I and like training and equity. And in like, if you go to like a program, say at Trent had a 4-year engineering program in the software engineering, would you, as in the software engineering program, teach you about D&I and inclusion in that program? Probably not, right? And business we do. Like in human resources, like at Trent, you take those classes. And so I think some of the things, our structures are not like that's set up to be a tool, like you're set up to be a worker within the system. Whereas what we're talking about and what I'm doing, there is no system. There is no tracks before me at this present moment. There are a little bit, but not like what we're doing. And so I think that I would not have the cross-interdisciplinary understanding and knowledge that is 100% required for what I'm doing. I always use the analogy, you remember when hospitals used to be run by medical doctors? And then in the 90s, they all kind of went belly up and they're like, oh, and now there's no medical doctors that run hospitals anymore. It's all business people. Because, you know, the skill set to be a surgeon is not the same to run, you know, a $100 million budget hospital, right? And so I think of myself as like a business person and not as a technologist. And a lot of technology now think of it as like math and coding, but a lot of it now is governance, regulation, and data management. And that is a science, I guess, but not really. And it's not really like you wouldn't go to engineering school and study software engineering at Queen's Engineering and study data management. You may now, but in 2005, you wouldn't have existed. So I think that we're not going to see that. I think what we're also going to see is more of the programs that CIT is offering. And I think what's really important around going to university is whatever you're studying is that ability to critically think and being able to write, comprehend, and communicate to others that need to understand the same thing. And that is essentially what I do. And I'm constantly like translating and writing. I'm constantly writing concept papers. I'm writing articles that are, you know, around that forming this. And I think that is a skill that you get in all the programs. You can apply the context on top of it. So the work that I've done, if you think of my career, oh, someone's getting angry. My career has been, I've been in policy, regulation, development change, and I was in like education, and I worked in economic development and resource development, and then I worked in like, tech, and I work in, but it's the same things really that I'm doing, right? It's around increasing participation in the space. It's around economic development, increasing Indigenous representation and education and job readiness. Those are what I really do in the company. A technologist person is most likely going to be a CTO, which is Paul, right? He's the CTO. He is the one that Chief Technology Officer. So anything that has to do with tech, that has to do with, like, when I say tech, like, I mean, like, how are we implementing, a blockchain server on a reserve that is working on, the governance model, like that. Governance models is me. That server and the coding and those things, that's him. But somebody has to, on the business side, manage the client. And so Leanne and I manage the client, and we have to translate. So Paul in tech says, this is what it is. And then we've got to understand it. I've got to write it all out in a different way and then present it to the community in order for them to understand, even for myself to understand. It's like a filter that comes through me. And that's a university skill. That's what you learn in English. That's what you learn in sociology. That's what you learn in all of those things. And it's like really, really, really important. And it's really hard to find Indigenous people sometimes that have those capabilities. At the level that we need. The tech sector has the highest education rate, of all the sectors. Like, it's high. Everyone has a master's degree. And so it's because of that complexity that's needed in regards to translating in that space. So I think you could do it. If you studied a professional engineering software program, do they teach you a lot of those critical skills? In Trent Business, I didn't really get that. I got that more from the Native Studies side. In the business side, we just did presentations, right? We didn't really write a lot of papers, like, per se. And when I got to Queen's, I didn't know that, like, I got my first paper back at Queen's, and I had sourced it all well and done all the work. It was 30 pages long. It was great. I thought it was really good. And I got it back, and they were like, well, we grade you not on, like, how well you wrote, like, how it's written in the concepts. It's actually graded on how you vetted those concepts through the different levels of academic journals. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I had never heard of that before. Right? Like, it was just a different level, like, because at Trent, we just, I just didn't do that in business. So that was really, really helpful. And I had to learn mighty quickly on that in my master's program on that, because I was in law classes too at Queen's. Law is 100% final. You can do a 4-hour exam, or you can do a 100-page paper.
You're making a great argument, Jarret, for the interdisciplinary learning of Trent University. Yeah. And what's great is that a lot of us say it, but I know you said you're getting older, but come on, like, you are speaking to a younger audience than some of us who are like, no, it's all still relevant. And then they look at us like, no, but, like, you don't know what we're experiencing out here in the world. And we say it all the time, Jarret, like, broad-based, interdisciplinary, critical thinking, learn all the pieces, use your best strengths, which is what you're showing here. I loved what you said there about, all the things that are your strengths come out in all of the different businesses and industries that you're in. And I think if we could get at that for ourselves, like, the heart of what your skills are, the rest comes. And we say it all the time. Careers says it at Trent, but this is like a shining example of that. And so I love that you said that with your, in my opinion, relative youth. So thank you.
Yes.
Brilliant. I really want to thank you for sharing with us today. I think we're all still sort of gobsmacked by how much you've done and the amazing connections that you make between all of your industries. And what I was struck by is by the end of your slides, I thought, yep, all of those things are connecting in a really beautiful way. So you are a real treasure, and we're really so grateful that you came to chat with us today and to share your experience. And so really, honestly, proud that you're a Trent alum, I have to say that, and a Gzowski alum. So excited to have a Gzowski alum, like, paving the way for the great future. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm going to hit stop on the recording, and thank you for a great conversation. So thanks for the wonderful conversation, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.